Yes, Atlanta, I hear you loud and clear.
It was the saddest and most traumatic story I've ever covered.
I would rather cover a war than a school shooting any day.
We're back at 7:30 on this Thursday morning. It's the 20th day of April.
Maybe there's some elements of the public that are really clamoring for this, but everyone I talk to, everyone, reporters, just friends, outside of the situation, they see the word Columbine and their eyes glaze over.
Now hold it down. Hold this silver button down.
Two boys, both students, opened fire and then killed themselves in the worst massacre, the worst school massacre in U.S. history.
You know, a lot of people think we're vultures. We like it when a tragedy happens and we want to win awards, and nothing could be farther from the truth. I wish Columbine never happened. I wish none of these things that we cover that are sad would happen.
Maybe it's time to just say goodbye to this story.
But since the 20th, it has been hard to read the papers and watch the news. Not so much because there's too much Columbine in the media, and there is too much Columbine in the media. But because I know that a lot that was said about Columbine by the media was inaccurate at best and lies at the worst.
I can hear you. I could hear you before. Yes, I can hear you now.
I don't know how much longer I can do it for. Maybe I'll go open up a bait shop somewhere.
Jefferson County 911. Yes, I am a teacher at Columbine High School. There is a student here with a gun. He was shot out a window. Okay, did anybody get injured, ma'am?
It didn't take very long, listening to the police radios, to know we had something really serious. So we started just kind of shipping everybody in the newsroom toward the scene.
I said they'd take them to Swedish, and Michelle looked at me and said, go. And I was out the door.
There's nothing but cliches for this one. It was all hands on deck, and everybody was pitching in.
I heard one of our assignment editors say, we have a kid at a school with a gun.
Shots fired is enough for us at a high school that you would, that's enough to say, go.
At KUSA-TV, the morning had been slow, like this one. Anchors Kyle Dyer and Gary Shapiro were putting the finishing touches on their noon show scripts when the assignment desk started hearing heavy traffic on the police scanners.
You have someone who's been shot where?
Soon, the newsroom and the police were getting reports of explosions at Columbine High School.
20 to... Okay.
They've got the rooms locked up.
Okay.
The kids who are running with the shotgun also have monopipe cocktail bombs.
Okay, yes.
By 11:30, usually our scripts are done for the noon show, and we heard that there was reports of a shooting at Columbine. So get on the set, get ready in case something, if it is real, we'll break in early and then, just do an update and have more at noon. We had no idea. We thought it might be someone in the parking lot, I think we first heard. No idea what was going to happen that day.
That happens a lot, and it turns out to be nothing. So that's kind of what I thought it was going to be this time. Obviously, it wasn't.
At 11:30, both anchors were in the studio, cutting into regular programming with an eyewitness who was on the phone. CNN also moved on the story quickly, opting to go with their Denver affiliate's live coverage.
We're going to listen in to one of our affiliates in Denver, Colorado, KUSA, where there was a report of a school shooting, a high school student on the telephone talking to their anchors there.
Came from the backside of the school where the student parking lot is at.
Are you with other students right now?
No, I'm at my house.
Less than 50 minutes after the first shots were fired, the story was unfolding before a national audience. Continuous coverage, all commercials canceled.
Where the gunman was shooting, or gunmen, there's people there standing there getting out of the way. I'd imagine some of them probably had to get hit.
Yeah. I put myself, being a parent, in that role, and I live in that community, so it was very personal to me. And I thought, those parents need information, and they need it fast, as much as we could give them.
It was really scary for me, being on the air, live, because you have to seem calm, cool, and collected, because there are parents out there totally freaking out, devastated.
From Colorado,
in the control room, the usual routine of following a script was abandoned as producers fielded calls from more witnesses and waited for reporters and crews to send in live signals from the scene.
Obviously, it's all an ad-lib situation, but new information is coming in all the time. And so as the viewer is learning about what's going on with the story, we're learning about what's going on with the story. We take notes. We rely on the producer to tell us where to go next. The desk and the producers set up interviews with witnesses, obviously get the reporters out into the field, and you know, we wear these little earphones and they tell us what to do next.
The producer and director were in the control room. The executive producer was in there. I was in there in a role that was standing back from what they were doing, just trying to look at the big picture. What are we saying?
We got one call from a kid who had run to a nearby house, and we put him on the air right away, and he described what he saw in the school. And we started getting more phone calls, some of which proved to be hoaxes, we later found out.
We want to go on the phone right now to James, who is a student. James, we understand you're inside the school?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and you're in a secure area, I imagine.
I'm in the classroom, locked doors.
Okay, what's going on there now? Can you tell?
What he was saying seemed to be true, because while he was saying he was hearing gunshots, our crews out in the field were saying we're still hearing gunshots. And I think what was happening was he was watching the coverage on TV, and as new information was being relayed over the TV, he'd just sort of repeat it. Whatever he had given as his name, there was no one registered at Columbine or in the Jeffco Public Schools at all with that name. So that's when we kind of realized that we'd been gotten.
We have standards that we won't put anyone on the air on a phone call until we call them back, so we can double check they are who they say they are where they say they are. I would encourage all local stations to have the same rules, but in this case, whether they had those rules or not, apparently they didn't check on that one particular call, and a hoax got on, and we look just as bad as the local station does when that happens.
Your deadlines are every minute. You don't have the luxury of reflection. In the rush of the moment, you know, mistakes are made. You don't have quite the period of reflection that you have in a newspaper environment.
At the Rocky Mountain News, time did not seem like a luxury.
We were swept into the story just instantly.
Editor John Temple alerted the printing plant. Knowing the competitive pressures in a two-newspaper town and feeling the growing enormity of unfolding events, Temple decided to do an extra, a special edition that would hit the streets that afternoon.
And the toughest thing about producing an extra was that to get photos was very difficult to get out of Columbine, because there were so many cars that had sort of been abandoned as parents and people flocked to find out what had happened to their families. And so we ultimately had to send a photo editor to find photographers and gather films. They also went to hospitals, and then the film was so bloody that it wasn't appropriate, and we didn't feel that that was what we wanted to put on the cover.
The first images photo editor Janet Reeves saw were from the hospitals.
We chose an image where you couldn't see who was on the stretcher very well, and that was going to be on the cover of the extra if we didn't get anything else.
As the deadline approached, editors got the first roll of film from George Kahanik, the only still photographer at the makeshift triage scene outside the high school.
It was visual, and it was also it was just very emotional to hear the crying and the sobbing of some of the students who had not gotten wounded themselves but escaped, and just the horror on their faces. And
I looked at George's film, and within one roll saw the one picture of, that was the one of the kid who had his hat on backwards. He was hugging someone. It was the very first image I saw of that intensity, and we moved that, and that made the extra.
Film from close to a dozen photographers began coming in. Now the emphasis was on the morning edition and on the wires.
You know, we have an event like this, the whole world calls within the first few minutes. They all want pictures.
The Rocky Mountain News moved more than 80 images, including the one they chose for their own front page, which was picked up by papers all over the world and became the signature photo of the Columbine tragedy captured by Kahanik.
I was, you know, at least 40 yards away, maybe farther. But still, you wish you were invisible. I mean, you don't want to inflict any more pain on people, but that's the nature of our job. I mean, we have to sometimes photograph things that are not pleasant, or our emotions say one thing and our professional ethics tell us we still have to try and do our job.
Over Columbine right now. What can you see from there,
Helicopters were deployed early on to get aerial views of the school. Of the hundreds of pictures shot that day, one of the most controversial came from a news chopper, an image so small that Reeves didn't see what it contained.
I was really concentrating at first on the police officer that was crouched behind this car and holding children down. And looking at the bare neg on the light table, it looked like almost like some backpacks and stuff on the sidewalk. But so I was really concentrating at first on the reaction of these people behind the car. And so I marked a few, and then I moved them on to Steve Dykes, who was sitting at the computer, and he would bring the image up. And he said, "Janet, you have a body here."
And the news under normal circumstances does not run pictures of dead bodies.
We needed to show people, we could not sort of soften what had happened to the point where people didn't realize how terrifying this event was. We did not put it on page one, which some papers did around the country. What we did was we had a color spread for photos on page 12 and 13. If you had already made it to 12 and 13, you knew where you were and what you were looking at, and you needed to see you need to see the best images, and that's where we ran it.
So many things you hide from the public, in a sense. They can't handle it. It's too graphic. You're going to upset the family, which I got to tell you was the #1 concern, I think, by everyone.
I knew as a parent myself that I would, if that boy were my son, I would know that was him lying there. And that I knew that the parents would and I did not know whether they would know that their son was dead or alive. In fact, they did not know until they saw that picture that their son was dead. And I think that says more about the police than it does about the newspaper.
They have no idea where the suspects are inside the school, where the students who they believe are still inside, where they are, although, as Wayne had mentioned, they had centered their attention on the auditorium area. There you see they've taken a fire truck.
Whether the sheriff's police were slow or simply cautious, by the time they began clearing the school, camera crews and reporters were in place, recording the unfolding and painful drama and broadcasting it live.
So they can get a little bit
driven by or not. I don't know if we can go back to that picture or not, but as you can obviously see, there are still some students in that situation. You can see the SWAT team obviously has been able to extricate that person from the building.
I got there and there were 4 ambulances from a variety of ambulance companies that were lined up. There was a suburban house with a split rail fence that had been turned, the front yard was turned into the triage site. And there were about 10 to 12 kids with varying degrees of severity of injuries lying out on the lawn.
The way it is described to me, and this is from the very first person on the scene who happened to be a hospice nurse in the neighborhood, was that she was called to come out here. People in the neighborhood knew she was here. They said there are injured kids.
And so she was using the stethoscope as a tourniquet. People were tearing off their T-shirts and giving them to her, and she was using them to staunch the blood. I mean, it was very, very raw stuff.
There were, I would say, at least 9 kids here. I mean, there were 4 or 5 over there. There were 2 or 3 over there. We saw 1 over there that ended up going up in a helicopter. The emotion was incredible. It's hard for a parent to see the parents who came.
Kathy, take a moment. Take a moment. Stay with yourself there for a second. There's help there on the way, and there's an ambulance there as well. We're going to go to Suzanne McCarroll right now. We're going to give Kathy Walsh just a break there. Very trying situation out there, as Kathy said.
So there I was making pictures, and at one point I remember noticing to my right 2 people I knew in the TV industry, 2 newscaster people, reporters. They were crying. And, you know, these are veterans, you know, almost my age, and it really hit me when I saw that, too.
The high school kids had blown out of this high school every which way. There's not too many public buildings. So they went for the elementary school.
I remember there were these kids' silhouettes, like, you know, construction paper things cut out, and it was very, you know, it was an elementary school. It had that little kid feel to it, and there were all these students who had gotten out early, sitting on the stage, kind of standing up there waiting for their parents to get there, and there were several who clearly their siblings or their good friends, they had no idea where they were, and they were just sitting on the stage, you know, their heads in their hands, sobbing.
So the situation that I was faced with was, you know, a 16-year-old kid whose parents didn't even know that he was alive, and I'm talking to him.
I remember thinking, like, this is really terrible. And as the day went on, it got so much worse, so much worse.
Wake up to what, sir?
Well, I think, you know, there are a lot of kids out there who have access to weapons, and apparently more than guns here.
As the dimensions of the story grew, the entire nation was focused on Littleton. But for Denver journalists, the impact was just beginning to sink in.
And it's not just Littleton. We know that now. We've had lots and lots and lots of places.
It must have been 6:30, and President Clinton was on the radio decrying what had happened to Columbine, and I thought, what the hell is he doing commenting on this? I had no conception whatsoever of how big this was. And it really didn't sink in till later. I mean, it was a very slow sort of process.
I think when it hit me the hardest was one of our reporters called, we did not go on the air with this, called into the control room, this might have been around 2 o'clock, and said, I'm hearing there are 25 kids that are dead. And I remember almost dropping to my knees in the control room.
I was one of, you know, thousands of people throughout this area who went home and cried, and then did it again the next morning. I could barely read our own coverage. It was so difficult.
From NBC News, this is Today with Katie Couric and Matt Lauer.
And welcome to Today on this extremely sad Wednesday morning, everyone. I'm Katie Couric. We have come to Columbine High School in Littleton,
I returned to Clement Park at about 5 in the morning the next day, and this was when we thought that the bodies of the victims were going to be coming out of the library. And this shows the naivety of what we thought here at the Rocky Mountain News early on. My editor said, I want you to be with some of the parents who still don't know what happened to their children, whose children have not come home, and just, you know, stand there outside the school as these bodies are being carried out.
Scott, I understand from overnight now the number of victims has been downgraded from 25, as we were talking about 12 hours ago at this time, to 15 to 16 victims.
Well, I get to the site, and I mean, a huge area, I mean, hundreds of yards around the school, completely cordoned off. You have these limos carrying Katie Couric and, you know, all of these national, all the morning shows were there.
In the last half hour, we were talking to 3 students at Columbine High School who saw what happened yesterday. Indeed, were very much a part of what happened and had a very chilling day.
It was complete chaos. It was a madhouse, and it was 5 in the morning.
I think that we have to look into society at what caused these kids to become killers, and it's going to be a little tougher, unfortunately, than passing or not passing a few laws.
Well, thank you very much, Governor Bill Owens. Thank you for joining us this morning. That's Governor Owens. He's going to be here for a little while. He's going to be doing some interviews with a lot of the national media, and then he might, in fact, actually speak with some family members, and then he will be moving on and getting on with his day.
You're looking right now at a live picture from Copter 4 this morning.
I remember the morning after Columbine, I woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning to the sound of a news helicopter flying over our house. And I turned on the TV, and there was Katie Couric in the park down the street from my house interviewing Craig Scott, who is the brother of Rachel Scott, who was killed at Columbine. And, you know, you look around, and all of a sudden there's Dan Rather, that specially built platform that they had made for him as close in as they could with the Columbine in the background, and it was pretty amazing.
A lot of people came in, and we didn't even have the biggest contingent. I think at any one time might have had 50 or 60 people, and I think ours was the smallest network news contingent.
It may have happened across the Atlantic Ocean, but in most of Europe, the scenes of a school shooting in Colorado top the morning news bulletins.
Einer amerikanischen Schule sind die genauen Motive für das Blutbad.
There were people from Australia and Japan and Germany, and there must have been 500 news wagons down there.
I do have a final total number of fatalities. We have 15 fatalities. That includes 11 males and 4 females. I think there is some mixture of students and possibly at least one faculty member.
Scores of reporters in search of stories, interviews, angles, answers about the dead.
Have you informed the families of the deaths yet?
Some families have been informed, however, actual confirmation of the victims hasn't been made yet. Positive IDs are still to come on all the victims.
Valerie Schnur, she is 18 years old in serious and stable condition. Anne Marie Hochhalter, 17-year-old in critical condition. Sean Graves, a 15-year-old in serious but stable. And Richard Casaldo, a 17-year-old in critical.
The news had printed that Rich had died, and it was a mistake. And Swedish Hospital called up and was furious. You know, we didn't give out this information. Where in the world did you get the idea that he died? Because he's very much alive.
Doctors say 18-year-old Richard Castaldo, who was shot on the chest, arms, and back, is one of them on the mend.
His dad was there, and he wanted to talk to somebody at the news to basically just scream at us. And so they sent me down to Swedish to talk to him, and I thought he was going to hit me.
His father says he's a tough kid.
He plays tuba in the band, and he also plays saxophone, so I think his lungs are in pretty good shape, and he's pretty stubborn.
That was typical of a lot of, I think, experiences that reporters had, is there was just a lot of anger out there that there was no healthy place for it to go. And so we got a lot of it. Part of it was because of the mob mentality of 50 reporters that we talked about earlier.
Reporters all wanting to know who were the gunmen.
Friends say they were involved with a small nonconformist group that was commonly called the Trenchcoat Mafia.
Where did they get the weapons?
Police hauled away lots of computer equipment, monitors, printers, and even some computer printouts with weaponry information.
Who has responsibility?
What's sort of interesting about this is that we heard in the press conference that there will be an ongoing investigation looking for someone who might have knowledge or aided and abetted or assisted. What about the investigation in terms of if there's a website? Do you see that as a possibility that anybody else could be brought into responsibility civilly or criminally?
And why did they do it?
Jokingly, what about these reports that they were picking out black people to deliberately shoot them?
No, they weren't racist. They hated everybody.
A lot of the misinformation that came out in the first few days were because, you know, you had hundreds of reporters relying on 16-year-olds. A lot of them had their own agendas. A lot of them thought of this is their 15 minutes, and they wanted to be surrounded by cameras and to tell their sob stories of being stuck under a library table or, you know, running through the halls as shots are being fired. And yeah, when we were all over that.
A student came out and said, it's two guys from the Trenchcoat Mafia. Well, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold weren't part of that group. They wore black trench coats, as did some other kids, and there was a picture in the yearbook. But later on, it comes out not only were Harris and Klebold not members, this group was just a bunch of kids posing for a yearbook picture. And yet that picture in the yearbook was broadcast around the country. And to this day, many people still think the Trenchcoat Mafia, this group of outcast students, had something to do with the massacre, and indeed that's not the case.
Experience you can trust.
With network and local stations sharing information and videotape, stories took on a life of their own.
It was one of those defining moments in our televised, digitized, wireless, we are there times.
Especially in this day and age of 24-hour news, internet news, people now are seeing the news process unfold before them. Whereas in the past, they may not have seen that. So the first interviews are followed by later interviews, and at the end of the day, you have a better picture Now those first interviews are getting on the air, they're getting on the internet, they're getting in extra editions of newspapers right away. And so the time to check it out, make sure it's true, has shrunk to nothing.
And at home spent hours on the computer adding even more violence to Doom, a medieval war game. A close friend and rare female member of the Trenchcoat Mafia group says Eric
Teen sources and reporters explaining a youth culture they did not fully understand.
was foreign, the dark heavy metal of Rammstein.
I felt like they needed to have people our age covering this story. They had, people who were 30 and 40, and were trying to do these trend pieces about what kids are doing over the internet and what a horrible game Doom was, and half my friends were playing it on the weekend.
Did you report the Trenchcoat Mafia?
Absolutely. The Trenchcoat Mafia was reported. Grenades were reported going off in the school. A number of different things that proved to be wrong. Just wrong. In fact, perhaps the worst example of a wrong piece of information came from the county sheriff, who came out 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 4.5 hours later, saying there's 25 dead. And everybody reported that. I mean, how could you not report it? It came from the sheriff.
Sheriff Stone, all the bodies we're told now have been removed from the high school.
With national news celebrities in town, local reporters were now playing second fiddle.
Suddenly the playing field went from a handful of local media, television stations and newspaper reporters who were trying to get certain aspects of a story, trying to get key interviews, trying to get key information, to not only a large number, but a large number of very prominent people.
A reporter with a pad and a pencil isn't that attractive. It's much easier to say no to someone like me than it is to Barbara Walters.
I think some of that's sour grapes. I think some of that is the local reporters wishing they'd got that interview. Yes, the network news anchors have a power or an attraction. When Barbara Walters calls you, you're going to take the call.
When Brokaw, Rather, and Jennings all fly in to do live broadcasts out of there, it's an extraordinary story.
It is an extraordinary story, and the media presents its own special problems. I mean, they come
Problems
in like a
that
small
only
army
got
that,
worse as the
kinda
days went on.
overwhelms,
And I'm walking back, and this woman from Fox walks up to me and said, "Did he say anything about the third gunman?" And I was sitting there flipping through my notes, and I didn't answer, and I just kept flipping through my notes to get back up to date. And she was literally pulling on my arm, trying to look into my notebook. And I said, she asked me again, and I said, "I don't have time to do your reporting for you." And that's the way they treated us. A lot of these people sort of like, give us the phone numbers, who's the contact person, blah, blah, blah. And we were so busy that we didn't have time. And I just said, "I don't have time to be your reporter." And she goes, "Well, geez," and walks away.
It makes it harder for everybody to do their job when there's that many reporters needing to get interviews and quotes and information.
We all look like a bunch of swarming insects trying to feast on this tragedy.
So I made a couple frames, and it wasn't but 15 seconds, and I look around, and there's like 30 other photographers just swarming on this scene. They're like, "Oh, look, there's a picture," and he's shooting it, and I couldn't do it anymore after that. It was like, this has become a media circus.
Fox News Channel delivers.
Well, it was interesting that night I was home and I was writing a story, and one of the editors called me and said, "Hey, Fox needs somebody who's been covering the story to come on and talk about what it's like to cover the story." Well, the story's dwindling at that point when we're interviewing each other. And my response was using a little alliteration, but I essentially said what Fox could do. And he laughed. He said, "Okay, we'll put you down for a no."
Thousands of people turned out to express their grief at public memorials for the 13 victims of the Columbine shootings. By now, the physical and emotional toll that was so evident in the community was surfacing in newsrooms.
We then began to cover 13 funerals. And now I think going through 13 of them, I mean, day after day, I had a photographer come in tears and said, I can't do anymore.
People understand now that this stuff hits you hard and that you don't just suck it up and get a bottle of bourbon and go home.
After, I think it was the first week, I'm not sure of the timetable, but John Temple, the editor, realized that the staff was emotionally and physically just worn out from working long, hard hours and doing this awful, awful job. And required everybody to sit in on a debriefing in which some psychologists or grief counselors were there. Nobody was saying very much until a librarian, an older woman, who hadn't been there, started to say, "I'm just not handling this very well," and then broke down. Well, it opened the floodgate. I mean, all of the emotions that everybody had been holding back kind of got let out.
I didn't find this out until a couple of weeks ago. They had counselors down here for people to talk to. They brought in lunches and they had massages and all this. We didn't have water.
At the two competing daily newspapers in particular, a relentless pressure to pursue every aspect of the story remained.
We were made to relive that horrible day over and over and over and over again.
Because of the newspaper war and because of the competition even with the national papers, that we tended to write about every little development to the point where people just got weary.
When most of the national press went home and we were left to try to do the more in-depth follow-up stories, re-interview kids, knock on doors, find family connections of the two killers, that the resentment really came across. Because these are kids who, you know, they just graduated from high school. In some cases, they were kind of ready to move on with their lives. They were ready to recover, and here comes, you know, reporters knocking on their door asking them to rehash prom night with Dylan Klebold.
In the weeks following the shootings, almost every aspect of life for Columbine students showed up in the press. Many stories of recovery and hope, but still stories that kept Columbine squarely in the media spotlight.
Mrs. Hochholder, who is the mother of Anne Marie, who was severely injured, is partially paralyzed from the shooting, committed suicide. Unfortunately, we found out about it before the family was notified.
That was kind of the day where everything boiled over, because the editors saw it as a big news story, and for some reason, the reporters, particularly the ones who'd been there the day that Columbine happened, it just really hit us hard.
So I called, and they said, "Oh yeah, we want you to go out to Mrs. Hochholder's former neighborhood and knock on doors and get reaction." And I said, "No, I'm not going to do that. If the Hochholders don't know, neither do their neighbors." And I refused to do that.
I mean, I was sent to Columbine to get reaction from students, and I remember sitting in the parking lot over at Clement Park, which is often where students walk through when they came out, really arguing on a cell phone with an editor saying, what are they possibly going to say?
So I filed my stuff, and an editor came over and said, "We're going to make your thing part of the main story." And I said, "That's good, because when I get done with this, I'm leaving. I've had enough for today." And he said, "Oh no, stay and be our conscience." And I said, "If you haven't grown a conscience yet, I'm not going to stay here and be it for you."
This is the CBS Evening News.
Good evening. A unique new insight tonight into the Columbine High School shootings.
Throughout the summer and fall, Columbine continued to command attention. The lead story on CBS when the network obtained footage from surveillance cameras in the cafeteria.
No one was killed in the cafeteria. All the students made it out. But the time-elapsed edited video spanning about 25 minutes shows what school officials think is one of the gunmen dive out of the way moments before what seems to be one of their bombs explodes, filling the cafeteria with smoke.
After weighing the journalistic merits of the tape, we've decided not to air it on our local broadcasts.
He was a friend and an associate of Eric Harris and
On the
Dylan
6-month
Klebold,
anniversary, the threat of a copycat crime.
Killings. Now, he was arrested after telling classmates that he intended to finish what his friends had started.
Information in an exclusive Time magazine cover story.
Just before Christmas, a cover story in Time magazine that outrages parents.
Time reporters watched videotapes of the killers, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, planning their attack. Now the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department is taking some blame, but claims that Time overstepped its bounds.
I think the only thing that we did wrong
was the fact that we trusted that Time would not release the quotes before we could show these to the family.
Reporters, they charge, get more and better information than they do.
We were supposed to be the first to know. We're supposed to have a full thing before they even release it to the media.
I mean, really, when you're in this business, it shouldn't be very hard to know that when you have sensitive information to families, you don't release it to the media.
Did you run that? Did you run that headline?
You're goddamn right I did. I got a desperate call at 9:30 saying we were 2 hours past our deadline and nobody knew where the hell you were.
It's wrong. It's 180 degrees wrong. We got to change it.
In the movie The Paper, Glenn Close plays the editor, and as the editor, Michael Keaton has this top story, and he wants to hold off until he can get corroboration for his story, and Glenn Close says,
Given the information we had at the time, the story's right.
Yeah, but it's not right. I got a cop, I got a quote. It's wrong.
Not for today, it's not. Tomorrow, it's wrong. We only have to be right for a day.
There shouldn't be semantics. There shouldn't be money. People will read this, Alicia, and they'll believe us.
We're the sun. They'll take us with a grain of salt.
we saw that occurring because of the media, print media especially, wanted to be first with certain pieces of information. It was almost as if we'll run the story and then we'll get corroboration the next day.
Stories have to be written in a day because our competition down the street might have the same story, and I think it's been kind of a balancing act.
Because of that pressure, I think a lot of us jumped on these tips that under other circumstances we certainly would have been much more careful in verifying.
You know, whichever newspaper closes, the people who work there are going to have trouble sending their kids to college, and they're going to have trouble with retirement. I mean, it's going to have a major impact on their lives. So we really care who wins at both papers.
But we're not, exactly the Washington Post, okay?
No, we're not. We run stupid headlines because we think they're funny.
Mm-hmm.
We run maimings on the front page because we got good art. And I spend 3 weeks bitching about my car because it sells papers. But at least it's the truth. As far as I can remember, we never, ever knowingly got a story wrong.
2 teenagers shot and killed, at a Subway sandwich shop is a big story, and a big local story.
In February, 2 Columbine students were shot and killed during a robbery at a neighborhood sandwich shop.
Now it became a national story because of its proximity to Columbine, the fact that the students were Columbine students, and we can't control that. We, the local media, can't control what the national media does.
Once again, the national media descended, and now the community reaction was overtly hostile.
What we're seeing is many people under extreme stress, and one of the reminders, one of those traumatic triggers, are media people.
Reporters covering that were threatened by passersby, community residents. They feared for their lives.
But they are angry, and they're angry, we're a good lightning rod for that anger.
My colleague from the Denver Post, who was there, his car was surrounded by a large group of young men who were going to turn over his car. And he was on the cell phone with his editor, who didn't believe him, and so he held out his cell phone. They were screaming epithets. They threw snowballs and rocks.
We were an obvious target because what did we do? We reminded them constantly of Columbine.
In an effort to open a dialogue, school officials and members of the media met on neutral territory. These détente sessions were off the record, but friction between the two groups had been evident from the beginning.
Their paths would be blocked either walking or on the streets by members of the media who wanted a story. I certainly heard far more students who would come in crying or upset. They couldn't either get into the building, or else some member of the media had watched them leave our school campus and had followed them home or followed them to some of the social places that kids go to. Like any other profession, like any other business, you have a few bad apples. And there were some bad apples in the media, whether they were independent folks passing themselves off as a network individual, whether they were a local TV broadcaster who tried to pass himself off as an attorney for the Klebold family in order to get photos of Dylan at the prom. And I have a signed document of that.
There's a difference between a syndicated tabloid TV show that pays interviewees money to talk and a network morning show, for example, that never pays money, that is very sensitive and upstanding, has very high standards in ethics. There's a difference.
There's this analytical and self-critical look at the work every day, even if it's great, is can't we do it better? What could we have done differently? Were we responsible? Were we accurate on every point? Were we unbiased? And I really think this newsroom does that a lot.
As the first-year anniversary approached, the staff at KUSA-TV knew they had to return to Columbine, but just what they would do and how they would do it remained unclear. It was a dilemma shared by news organizations around the country.
I mean, I was struck. I was kind of going into that meeting with the Columbine families expecting to come out of it going, oh, God, we don't want to do anything at all, you know. And there really are some good stories. I mean, there are some, yeah, I mean, they were realistic, and you realize that there's some value in there to explore in terms of what the Velasquez family's been doing and, you know, some of the other stuff that's happened, so.
I think if we didn't do something, that would be as insulting as spending a whole lot of time just looking back at the horror of the day. So in the middle for them, for the families, is what good has come from it, what active role are the victims and families taking to sort of change the world for them. And the thing that really came out clear was don't forget the victims.
What did the Oklahoma stations do for an anniversary?
In Oklahoma City, it was such a citywide thing. I'm not sure that it's a good comparison. I don't know.
They had a villain, the villain's alive, and there was someone to vent towards, and right now it feels like the police, the education system, the media, right now we're taking sort of the heat for the fact that the villains in this case are dead. And the real explanation about why they did it is still unclear, and with McVeigh and Nichols, at least through trials, I mean, there's this way to have this catharsis through all that.
At the Denver Post, editors began to make plans, but many reporters were reluctant to go back to the story or to the community.
One reporter basically said, well, do we have to do anything? Why don't we just not do anything? Let's just not write about it. Wouldn't that be the thing to do? Well, that's not going to happen. But that tells you something about the level of reluctance here.
My stomach just balls up at the thought of doing this again, of being under pressure to go out and do the same thing again. I absolutely, I am not looking forward to it, and I'm trying to think through how to frame it for myself so I can do it.
Reporters who had kind of been out covering this and dealing with the victims more sort of stepped forward and said, listen, you know, we don't think this is going to help the paper. We certainly know it's not going to help the kids who went through this and their families. So let's talk about what our readers want and what our responsibility is here.
And the closer we got, we wanted to give you something to work with in terms of the activities and events.
As the media struggled, the school district had its own plan. 1 month before the April 20th anniversary, officials called in local and national media to discuss the ground rules. A media summit. On stage, students, counselors, psychologists, and victims' families. Sue Patrone, mother of slain student Danny Rohrbach, urged the media to remember the victims.
And that would be Cassie Bernal, Stephen Kernell, Corey DePuter, Kelly Fleming, Matt Kechter, Daniel Mauser, Daniel Rohrbach, Dave Sanders, Rachel Scott, Isaiah Scholes, John Tomlin, Lauren Townsend, and Kyle Velasquez.
The key point? Retelling the Columbine tragedy and replaying its images would be emotionally devastating.
Respectfully request that the media not broadcast any footage from April 20th. That would be footage showing students running from the school, students on stretchers, and murdered students.
As for interviews, a public relations agent was now speaking for victims' families. Journalists could submit their requests in writing and wait to be notified. A final request: leave the names Klebold and Harris out of the story.
I will be getting a note to you this afternoon.
We had a producer at that meeting who then called us up in Atlanta and said, here's what the families are asking for. What should we do? We said, You know, they have a point about showing the image of a dead body in the street over and over again. We're not going to do that. And so we told executive producers to only use that within the one piece we did where we agreed that image belonged. And so it wasn't used in teases, it wasn't used as a voiceover. It was not an image that was repeated over and over again on the anniversary on CNN. As far as using the names of the people who committed the crime, to me, I understand why that bothers the folks who lost children there, but that just is not something I could go along with.
So I feel for the parents who don't want those images shown on television, but I think it will be impossible to do that for any television outlet, to tell what happened without showing what happened.
But, he said, the request itself could make an interesting story.
I think I have had some symptoms of post-traumatic stress.
What else do you need? Do you need just some utility guys? Some
We may need cable.
pullers?
We may need cable. I don't know.
To limit the media presence, networks and local TV stations agreed to pool coverage for anniversary events.
Whatever combination of those.
Fox, you can put in what? Fox.
Camera and audio.
So a two-man crew.
Right.
For 2 days. All right.
A group interview with students, faculty, and staff would be arranged in early April in hopes that reporters would not ask for additional interviews on the anniversary itself.
We want to help you out by having this meeting tonight, and hopefully you can help us be respectful to all the students on the 20th and the staff. We kind of want it to be a private day, and I know that by having this meeting tonight, we can get as much information out to you as possible.
Now, you guys were talking about the purpose of this meeting is to dispel myths. What is the one myth that's been out there?
You know, I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but you did lead kind of a way to blame certain things on groups of people that didn't need to be blamed. Teachers, administration, principal, saying teachers, you know, could have picked up on clues, and I mean, it just, you know, it breaks my heart to hear that kind of stuff because, I mean, how can you prepare for a day like that?
One thing that, again, not to dog all the media and everything, but it's constantly seeing another update on Columbine in the newspapers, constantly seeing cameras across the street, you know, as we're leaving school or going out to lunch.
A lot of times I think they didn't investigate like they should have. There were things that reported that were absolutely untrue. Sometimes they'd show up at your doorstep uninvited and demand an interview. That's not fun when that happens.
Can each of you think of an example, a personal example, one example of how you've done well in your recovery the past year, but I also want you to give me an example of something that still troubles you, how you're not doing well.
Some days I feel very, very guilty, and I think that is what has really made me not as strong, is because I feel such guilt because I was out fast, and while I was out driving around, I was looking for her and I didn't know where she was, and I feel guilt because I thought maybe I would be able to go through it stronger and be stronger, and I just wanted to take her place, so I think that's what's really held me back.
As far as what's helped me the most is simply the girls in my cheerleading squad. They're the people I spend the most time with out of anybody, and I'm the most close to them. And the majority of them were in the building, and they're my same age, and I talk to them about it, and just to like talk about what we've heard and everything that's going on. That's the best for me. It's just to talk to people that were there. And as far as the hardest part would have to be thinking about the people who died, what they lost, and the good things that happened in my life, thinking that I get to do them, and that what did I deserve that I get to do them and these other people didn't. And that's the hardest part.
Probably the part that I have gotten stronger with is just to see my friends every day. They've helped me recover the most because they're like my sisters and my brothers now.
One of my best friends is Pat Ireland, and quite honestly, watching him heal healed me. it's just his everlasting pursuit to get better. And if you ask how, what I have trouble with is him. He can't, do what he did before. He was paralyzed on his right side, and it's, he's such a tough guy, and he coached our basketball team this last spring, and he just, I just have trouble seeing him, knowing that those two guys took away so much for him.
Just 10 days before the first anniversary, photographers at the Rocky Mountain News win the Pulitzer for their work on Columbine.
I would love these pictures to be part of history, and I think that's assured when you win a Pulitzer. This will not be forgotten in a couple of years, 10 years, and 50 years from now, when none of us are doing this anymore, the images will live on.
The Denver Post wins for its news coverage.
I am so proud of the people at the Denver Post. I can't express. Again, did we do everything right? No. Did we try our hardest? Boy, we tried beyond what I think a lot of us could endure.
Eight days before the anniversary, President Clinton returns to Colorado to press the gun control issue. With him, the national media.
Colorado is here to say we have lost enough of our children. It's time to have prevention, too, in this important area of our national life. I don't want any future president to have to go to Columbine, or to Springfield, Oregon, or to Jonesboro, Arkansas, or to all the other places I have been.
Our plan to spend the day with the family of a dead child, an injured child, and students has fallen apart a bit because we haven't been able to talk anybody into it, so we're still working on that.
We're going through the anniversary. It is a real thing. I mean, you can't deny that April 20th carries weight for this community.
One thing to think about is tomorrow at 11:21, the decorum in the newsroom, in your various departments. I mean, at least my understanding is that they're going to have a minute of silence for Columbine around the state. And I think we should observe that in the newsroom.
I mean, done right, this could be a really nice front page, and different too, which is what you were saying this morning.
Once again, the network shows were there, on the air before dawn. Correspondents said they were sensitive to community concerns.
There's no excuse for not being sensitive. Today, a year ago today, I'm sure we probably intruded and asked things that were difficult and were indelicate. Not today.
If people don't want to talk to me, I do not press the issue. Often in this situation, there is a lot of ambivalence about the press because in many ways people want to tell their story and are so powerfully emotionally impacted by what has happened, and yet they'll turn around after you've done an interview with them and claim they've been exploited by the media.
NBC News will not honor the parents' request that we not use any of the footage. We're cognizant and sensitive to those pictures that would be particularly upsetting.
It's worthy of showing how people remembered the time and how they felt about it. I don't think that it should be an excuse to just revisit the horror over and over again.
This is 9 News at noon.
Columbine. It is a symbol of hope and a symbol of renewal as we revisit painful memories on this, the one-year anniversary of the shootings at Columbine High. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Gary Shapiro.
And I'm Kyle Dyer. This is an expanded edition of 9 News at Noon.
A noontime memorial.
Mr. Frank DeAngelis.
theme today, a time to remember, a time to hope, is a very appropriate one.
Later, a candlelight vigil. The end of a year, but not of this story.
You know, we're going to have people who are going to be writing about this 3-5 years from now. They're still going to be doing it. And we're still going to be talking about, you know, how to do it.
I had nothing. I had nothing with me. I didn't even have an ID. Fortunately, my mom had a couple of my business cards in her wallet that she just keeps there on occasion, you know, in case it comes up. So I could, you know, actually tell people, prove to people that I was a reporter and not, you know, some quack. When the towers fell, many of the local television stations went off the air. And people were out of their homes listening to radios, you know, car radios turned on, and you know, listening to Mayor Giuliani speak about, you know, what they knew at that point. But I was getting stuff pretty sketchy, and you know, I was happy to be able to get a phone, and you know, I called in the newsroom, and they said, you know, your sister and your girlfriend have been calling here repeatedly. It was very emotional. It was, you know, she was sobbing on the phone. It's just like, oh, thank God. You know, and I didn't realize it was, you know, that people were that worried back here. You know, because, you know, we were in New York, and we were staying at a Marriott, and that Marriott, you know, got crushed under the tower, and you know, they had visions of us being in there somewhere.
It affected me much more than Columbine. It affected me much more than any tragedy I've ever covered or any news story I've covered. I mean, I've flashed back to it. I smell fire and I think of it. You know, I've cried, you know, much more since 9/11. And when, you know, when I'm going into New York from the airport, you know, I'm flying over, like we flew over Ground Zero the other day flying in, and, you know, we were flying in for my engagement party. It was a really happy occasion, and, you know, I just wept flying over it. And I know that's because I was there. I mean, obviously there would have been a sadness, but it was scary, and I've never felt anything like that. And just like the looks on people's faces, the terror. It's definitely changed, you know, my appetite for covering tragedies. You know, and it depends on what a tragedy is. It's like, I was at McVeigh's execution, and that was sort of a tragedy in and of itself, and that I would welcome covering, but and I've thought about this, you know, do I want to go out and cover a plane crash right now? Probably not, and I've never been queasy about that, but I am now. I'm also getting married, and I never expected it to be such a sort of, I don't want that stuff in my life right now. I don't want to be covering tragedies.
And I was so glad I brought a pair of jeans and sneakers, because that's what I ended up wearing for the next 4 days. But first and foremost, I always consider myself a reporter. I don't care if you're interviewing, you know, a head of state or Bill Blass. You know, you're going to approach this story as a journalist, ask the appropriate questions, try to anticipate what the reader is going to need to know, what information they're going to need to know at the end of that interview, and conduct yourself accordingly. And frankly, in retrospect, as difficult as it was at some points, I was so happy to be doing something. I mean, I saw some of my colleagues too in the streets, as in different places our paths would cross. So some of my other journalist friends who typically cover fashion or the clothing industry were out there as well. But I felt good to be doing something and helping, even in a small way, to convey, to tell some of the stories that were going on there. And to me, it's like what makes it such a fascinating and compelling story, and one that is going to be with us for the rest of our lives. That New Yorkers are so open, they will talk to you so easily. A lot of times in tragedies, and I haven't covered a lot of that, but people tend to clam up and they're going to be quiet and they don't want to talk and they're afraid to be quoted and stuff. And New Yorkers will just pour their stories out to you, and that made it sort of more touching and more, I guess poignant at the same time, and helpful to me as a journalist. I think most people want to tell you their story, but they resent being used or feeling that their privacy is being invaded, or that their other aspects of their person are being compromised. But if they are approached with empathy and sensitivity and just kindness and given the chance to tell their story, they'll usually warm up to you and do so.